Hi, everybody. Wow, this is great. My first time here at PyCon, so thanks very much for that warm welcome. My name is Jason. I'm going to talk about something that's not related to Shopify specifically. It's more related to a little indirection I took in my career. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Reset the timer. Right. So since this is there we go. Since this is a bit of a personal story, a little bit of background and context really helps. Hi, I'm Jason, in case you didn't catch that. I went to school about 16 years ago in electrical engineering, not computer at all. It was not what I went to school for, but I fell in love with it pretty quickly after school. And while I worked for a long time in the electronics and reverse engineering spaces, I quickly fell in love with open data, civic hacking, this kind of world. If you've heard of civic tech communities in Toronto, Ottawa, and other cities around the world, actually, they're full of like-minded people who have similar interests. So I actually used some of my open data skills for my master's degree and did a walkability analysis of transit systems across Canada. You can see Toronto there, obviously. By the way, Toronto walkability, middle of the pack, just as it was. Ottawa was not much better. And then I actually used that as my resume to apply to Shopify. I said, you're hiring a data analyst, here's me analyzing some data, you should hire me. And they did. That was 6 years ago, and it's been the best job of my life. I really enjoy it, and it's changed my life quite a bit. So why leave a good thing? I took it in direction. In January of 2018, I took a 3-month leave of absence. I took a sabbatical with the Government of Canada, which is about as anti-Shopify as you can find, the federal Government of Canada. There's not much, small company, agile to bureaucratic molasses. It's completely different. Why would I go? Sorry about that. So, in a nutshell, personal growth. I got some early career advice at Shopify that really stuck with me, and it was something a little bit unintuitive, that it's comfortable where it's easier, right? Staying where it's comfortable is the easier choice to make, and sometimes it's a necessary choice to make. Sometimes we don't have a choice in that regard, and you do develop deep expertise and deep solid reputation amongst your peers, and that's not a bad choice. It's really good, and a lot of people do that. And seeking that discomfort out seems unnatural. It seems like it goes against the grain. It seems like you're working against yourself by throwing away all those advantages. But if you have that opportunity and that luxury to do so, it can be a great opportunity for growth. And I've experienced that a few times throughout my career, of taking that leap, going from reverse engineering of electronics to software data analysis was that leap into a very uncomfortable space. True story, when I started at Shopify, I had to Google how do I copy and paste on a Mac, because I'd never used a Mac before. But first I had to turn around and ask my manager, where's the bloody web browser on this thing so I can install Chrome? I didn't know how. I was totally useless. So in January, I took the sabbatical with the Canadian Digital Service, or CDS. CDS is in the federal government. It's in the Treasury Board Secretariat department. If departments are people, the Treasury Board is like the government's manager. It doesn't provide any services to Canadians directly, or not many. Instead, it just makes sure that all the other departments are spending money appropriately and adhering to the right rules. Now, CDS within Treasury Board, their mission basically help the federal government do computers more better, in a nutshell. They're pitched as kind of a digital transformation agency. But really, they're a cultural transformation agency disguised as a digital transformation agency. The goal is culture change, not better computers. They are using newer approaches like agile, cloud technologies, open source, and they're really promulgating them throughout, trying to promulgate them into other departments, and they're trying to infect the government with these new ideas. So I knew some people there, and they asked me to come, and I saw their website, and really, it doesn't look like a federal government website. Right? If you've ever seen a Canadian federal government website, it doesn't have the red and white banner, or a blue, red, and white banner if the Conservative Party is in charge. It doesn't look like one. So I asked them about that. Why doesn't it look like a normal government website? And they said because the technologies that they had to use were quite restrictive and wouldn't lend itself well to good website, responsive design, etc. So they looked up the rules and said, what do we actually have to do? What's the law? What's the regulations? What do we have to comply with versus just what other people say? And the answer was that little logo in the top left corner. That's what they had to do. Also had to be accessible and bilingual, so there's some other stuff. But that was pretty much it. So they knew they were going to take some flack for it, and they launched this thing anyway. And yes, the day it launched, they got emails and phone calls demanding they take it down immediately and replace it with the standard branding. And they said, show me where it's written down that we have to do that. And it wasn't. Just someone's opinion. And that's when I knew if there was a place in government for me, this was the only place that I could possibly see myself working for a short period of time. In this case, forgiveness really was better than permission. It's not always the case. Sometimes that ends you up in jail. So be very clear what the rules are. CDS is a digital transformation effort. It is one of many such organizations around the world. Here's just a few. There's the Ontario Digital Service right here in Toronto, Australia. The Elders of the Community, the GDS, the Government Digital Service in the UK, and 18F in the United States, New Zealand, and then we've got Taiwan, Sweden, Estonia, going around the world, and it's growing all the time. So I made the long trek from Shopify to the government, which was 200 meters. It wasn't very far. I just got off the bus and turned left instead of right. That was it. So let me launch into what CDS actually does. So here's a real project that they did. This wasn't a project I worked on, but I worked next to the people who did, and it was amazing to watch them work. So they worked on a problem about rescheduling a citizenship, an immigration test of some kind, a language test, etc. Not scheduling, rescheduling. Talk about narrowing your scope, right? Right down to just the rescheduling problem. The problem is that newcomers to Canada, they have to take this language test to prove English or French proficiency. Not a very high proficiency, like I think grade 4 level proficiency is also required. In order to schedule you for this, they get this letter in the mail that says, notice to appear. It sounds very scary. And you can imagine how it's really hard for someone to read this, you're basically testing them to come in for a language test, and then you send them something that requires high school or university level reading requirements. Didn't work out. Imagine you are trying to immigrate to Canada. Your life is on hold. You've spent years in the immigration process. You're nearly there. You get this letter. You have an MRI that day, or a wedding, or a graduation ceremony. What do? So it turns out a lot of people are too scared to ask to reschedule, and so they just miss the MRI. And it's tragic, because the bureaucrats in the government who are rescheduling it, all they care about is what day are you free. So it's really there's this really tragic misbalance of importance here. Here's the letter that they actually get. You can't read that. Trust me, it wouldn't make any difference if it was blown up any bigger. You still couldn't read it. So let's zoom in on that section down there. Yeah, you still can't read that. But I will point a couple things. So first of all, you're sending this to people, asking them to go to a test to prove they can read at a grade 4 level. And they use stuff like within 30, bracket 30 day. Like, that's unnecessarily formal, right? We don't write that like that. Abandon if you do not contact IRCC with a reasonable explanation. That's really scary, and it doesn't define what a reasonable explanation is anywhere. Unnecessarily anxiety-provoking. So this is what is currently being used, and this is the problem they were trying to solve. Let's get this out of the way. So their first attempts, they looked good on paper. They tried it out, but they weren't really successful. In fact, they were as readable as the original one. The comprehension was exactly the same. But user research was the key to figure this out. They would have just tried it and would have failed because they didn't try it on real users. You are not your user. This is something I learned with them. It took several iterations, and at the end it resulted in ultimately more reschedulings, which means that there were people that were opting to not reschedule. And so resulting in more reschedulings and fewer anxiety-provoked phone calls following up on things after the fact. So it was a win across the board for them. And what was really interesting was they discovered that this is a device they didn't even know existed. And what they found was these people were taking these little devices with them to the comprehension test. It's a handheld translator that you just scan over the document, and it translates it for you from English to Chinese in this case. People were using this, and they had no idea that they were doing this. And once they discovered this, they changed the way the document laid out so it would make it easier to scan and it would provide a better translation for a significant number of people who were using these. So the end result is a beta version, but really the end result, I said the goal was culture transformation, not just better computers. As a result, they were embedded deeply with the immigration department. They had developers working with them side by side, and really they demonstrated the art of the possible. What can we do? So they used what I would consider modern development techniques: agile, automated tests, continuous deployment, all the great stuff. This is all terrifying to someone who's not ever worked this way before. In the end, they excited this group of developers with some new possibilities, and they took that back with them to immigration, and now they're working on bigger and better challenges within immigration without needing CDS to hold their hands anymore. So again, if there's a chance of success, they have successfully infected a part of Immigration Canada with this new ideas, and all we can do is hope that that blossoms into a full-on infection. That's not really a good metaphor, but what's the opposite of infection? I don't know. So I had the opportunity, oh, by the way, this is not a contradiction in terms, agile in government. This does actually work. I got the opportunity to go and talk with a lot of senior government bureaucrats. I was trying to pitch them like, this is why we want to work this way. And it's new, and it's scary, and it's the unknown, and they fear, and naturally, we as humans, we fear the unknown. This way works to a certain definition of works, and what you're proposing is radically different and therefore risky. So I had the opportunity, along with some of my colleagues, to go and talk to the CIOs of Veterans Affairs and other departments and say, like, there's a real reason we're doing this, and I knew that there were reasons from my time at Shafa, but I'd never had to explain them to people that this was all new ideas before. And this was really wonderful for me. It crystallized these concepts for me in my own mind. So I'll take a slide here from GDS. This is part of their digital service standard, which, by the way, is a great read if you want to read about like agile in government. It's wonderful. It's actually just nicely presented. And they talk about their defined phases of discovery, alpha, beta, live. Pretty standard for a lot of software developers, but it really clearly laid out from a government perspective. And it was really neat to see how they define things. So it was much more formal than I was used to as well. So I really learned a lot from the product managers that we imported from the UK for this. Discovery is the phase where you're building just learning tools. Doesn't even have to be code, just something that helps illustrate whether the feature is you're trying to solve are you even solving the right problem? You're testing it with real users. That was a totally new concept for a lot of people, that you would actually try this out on real people and not send out a survey to thousands of them, but I want to see 5 people use this. You gain a lot of very interesting insight that way. Then alpha version, you have the concept of disposable prototypes, something you're not going to ever turn to production, but something is intended to be thrown away and tried over and over again. So a very different approach from what I'm used to. And then once you go to beta, fully functional. This is the thing that's going to be a live version. You're collecting lots of data for improvements over time, and finally you hit the live stage, and this is just what we do now. This is now a thing that never dies, because software is never done. It's either under development or abandoned and rotting, and that's the only 2 states that software has, in my opinion. So it means it has to be constantly maintained. Security patches, new features, etc. They have these wonderful user-centered design principles that I really liked learning more about. So starting with needs, user needs, not government needs specifically. I can empathize with this. I worked for the data team at Shopify for a long time, and as a result, I was focused on the business needs. I was focused on internal reporting most of the time for most of my career in the data team. So focusing on the user needs was new to me. I knew it was important, but I had never seen it. And this strong focus all the way through the government to say, no, we really have to focus on what the users need. That was important, and it was a new idea for a lot of people. Understand the context in which the users are operating. Do the hard work to make it simple. Someone once famously said, I apologize for writing a long letter. I did not have time to make it a short one. It takes hard work to make something short and simple. It's easier to make something complicated. And then this constant iteration. Optimize for iteration speed is a core principle of mine. And then make things open, it makes things better. This is really neat. Hard to convince a private business to do this, but if this is going to work anywhere, it's in government. Because there's a moral argument to say that every line of code written for the government of Canada belongs to all Canadians and therefore should be accessible to everybody. And everything is already accessible under an access to information request anyway, so theoretically there's no difference. But it is scary working in the open, and so there's a lot of resistance to that. CDS is really pushing the boundary there. You can see every line of code I wrote, you can see every pull request I commented on in my 3 months in the government, including some dead repos that are no longer in use. They are committed to working in the open as much as possible, and they're going even further. When I was talking to the CIOs, I would take over the presentation at this point and talk about building the thing right. As opposed to building the right thing, build the thing right. I'm an engineer at heart. So like I said, I always optimize for iteration speed. How do we iterate multiple times a day? Government departments are used to quarterly, semi-annually, or annually-ish deployments. That is terrifying to me as a software developer, that it might take a year or more for my software to make it, or 3 months. Some of these departments, quarterly deployments means the code has to be done 5 months before deployment time. This means a critical bug can go unfixed for 5 months. And that impacts service delivery quite a bit. So when I was talking about these new approaches with these CIOs, this is the point that won them over, is that we're not doing this because we're lazy or because we just want to be quick. We're doing it because it's less risky. This allows us to iterate and build the right thing properly and react to change. I've really pushed these 3 main points my time at CTS, and they adopted them with gusto, which is continuous integration of small atomic changes at all times, rapid quality peer code review. I like to keep my pull requests to 200 lines of code or less and have pull requests reviewed within a day. That was the standard I tried to hold my teams to when I was there. And then, and this is the hard one for government, continuous deployment on each change. It can be done. It's difficult to do because it scares people. This is very new. So my goal was always, let's get it so we could deploy each change, what's commonly called continuous delivery. Let's make sure we could deploy each change and then push that envelope so that we can get to a point where we're actually continuously deploying. That is the hardest one to, in my opinion, to implement. So the main point here about, the title was about technical debt congealing. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to speak about failures in the general sense in government, but first I want to clarify. I take a blameless approach to this. I met wonderful people in every department I worked with in the government. Wonderful people working under not great conditions. If you have read the news, you might know they aren't even being paid properly in some cases. I don't doubt their intent, their resolve, their ability. They're great people. They're hardworking, talented, and the issues, as they usually are in this case, are systemic in nature, not personal. I may disagree with individuals, but and I do not doubt their resolve. So let's talk about this in the abstract. Let's start with technical debt. First, you have limited access to modern software development tools. That's a fact in government. They don't have administrative access on their machines. They don't even have laptops in many cases. Wi-Fi is a dream in some areas. GitHub is banned. Circle CI, Jenkins, Slack, like not even going to happen in many cases. Like you do not have, if you're a professional software developer now, every tool that you think you like to use, you probably can't use it there unless you find a way, unless you find the government finds a way for you. There is no culture of testing or automated deployment anywhere that I saw. The testing is done by people, and testing is done against a pre-written spec. That's just how it works. And the idea that we would automate this test and do it every day is a very new idea. So technical debt there. And as always, there's way too much to do. And since it takes them so long to do it, because they don't have access to the right tools and approaches, it takes them way too long. They don't have enough time. And so you make whatever decisions you can to get the job done, to provide whatever service you must to Canadians and others. But at the end of the day, this just mounts up into unmaintainable technical debt. So we start with that. That leads to failures. Seen the news, you've heard of Phoenix. If you haven't, Google it. You'll figure it out. It's the pay system that's not paying people properly. There's the Passport Modernization Initiative, which is not scheduled to fail for another 3 years. But don't wait to renew your passports, just FYI. Yeah, this all leads to unreliable systems, unexpected failures, security breaches. There was a famous one at CRA a couple of years ago. I think it was a struts dependency was unpatched. Treasury Board's network was famously completely compromised for months, leading them to completely cut off the internet for the entire Treasury Board Secretariat for several months a couple of years ago, and that scar tissue is deep in them, trust me. It's different when you're facing state actors. It's a different ballgame. As a result of all these problems, which comes from the technical debt, the confidence in the executives have in the development team plummets. And we are nothing without trust. As my friend and former colleague Chris Gavias says at CDS, we move at the speed of trust. You don't have trust, you don't move. So, executives being, they're going to exec, they solve it with policy. That's their stick. There's no carrot, it's all stick. They introduce a new policy. That failure will never happen again. We will make sure of it. We'll introduce a new policy. Problem is policies get stale. They become contradictory with each other. This extra complexity bakes in old approaches. Famously, when they tried to introduce cloud computing into the Government of Canada, there was the rule that the RCMP had to physically inspect the cloud computing provider. I'm not sure if you've ever seen an Amazon headquarters. They aren't letting the RCMP anywhere in there. It's not happening. So they were totally unable to procure cloud for a while because they had to update those rules. They were just out of date. As a result, the organization gets good at policy, not innovating. They get stuck in, these are the tools we have, we get good at figuring out how to make this work. And this is when, for me, tech debt becomes org debt. Congeals into organizational debt. In order to deal with all the problems, you introduce all these policies, and these policies require people and systems to be put in place to make sure that all the policies are being complied with. And in order to fix any of that, you have to tear down all those systems again. And that is harder than just some lines of code. Technical debt, you fix with some lines of code. Org debt, that's hard. That's people, that's mentalities, that's philosophies, that's jobs. What do you do with people whose job it is to manually test software and then you introduce automated testing? What happens to those people? How do you manage their careers when you've automated them out of a job? It's tough. It's really hard. Have some hard conversations. At Shopify, we like to talk about the trust battery as a metaphor, which I really like. Trust battery is a mental model. That's all it is, to say, you start with us, you're at 50% trust battery. Every interaction you have, you either are charging or discharging that trust battery. When you're way up here at 100% trust, you can move at lightning speed. When you're way down there, you're not moving at all. You're stuck. We move at the speed of trust. What this does is enables a different kind of conversation around, hey, instead of, hey, I don't like it when you do this, hey, when you show up for that meeting late, it makes us angry, it becomes very personal. By objectifying it to a third sort of external mental model, you can have a different conversation. Say, hey, when you show up late for these meetings, you're slowly discharging that trust battery you have with the rest of the team. Just changes the conversation ever so slightly and becomes a little bit easier to talk about and externalize. So that's why we like that. So, is government tech right for you? Do you want to introduce a great new technology to government? Can you not wait to get them on Kubernetes and Docker and all the great stuff? Python 3.7? Do you already know how to fix all their problems? Do you want to make a lot of money? Then no, that's not for you. That's not going to go well for you. On the other hand, do you want to work with a bunch of awesome people? Do you want to work on really interesting problems that help real people, sometimes the most vulnerable amongst us, immigrants, veterans, people, First Nations, like real people around us. And you want to help make incremental, sometimes agonizingly slow, progress to make our whole country a better place. I don't know. I'm not your boss, maybe. Have a look. Great people. I encourage you to have a look at them and see if it would fit for you. So for any more information, there's a bunch of links there for you. There's the Canadian Digital Service at digitalcanada.ca. There's also the Ontario Digital Service. Currently, Ontario government is under a hiring freeze, so they're not currently hiring anybody right now, but that won't last forever. There's also Code for Canada is a great nonprofit that basically sends people, teams of 3, I believe, a product manager, a designer, and a developer to work as subcontractors into the government, basically. They've been used at CDS. They're currently at Transport Canada has a team now as well. And of course, you can always reach out to me there at Actinolite. Thank you very much.